Hello, everyone. Welcome from Warsaw. My name is Michal Baranowski. I'm a director of the Warsaw office of the German Marshall Fund, and we are very happy to welcome you virtually in Warsaw, but also in Vilnius and in Berlin. And I know that many of you come from across the transatlantic space at a very timely and important discussion about what happened just a couple days ago over the skies in Belarus, the brazen actions of the Lukashenko regime, kidnapping of journalists and opposition leader, and what does it mean? What happened? What it means, and how should U.S. respond to this act of really brazen air piracy over our skies, and that included EU citizens. We have a wonderful panel that I will let my colleague Veronica introduce. Veronica is a fellow at GMF. She's one of our CEE fellows. So without further ado, let me pass it over to Veronica. Over to you.
Thank you, Michal. Hello, everyone. Today we have a fantastic panel, and we're so happy we were able to put this all together with such a short notice on such a timely event. So, dear guests, the audience, I would like to present to you Joerg Forbrig, who is the director for Central and Eastern Europe, and he's based in our office in Berlin. Arnoldas Pranckevičius, who is the deputy foreign minister of the foreign affairs minister, based in Vilnius. And also we are waiting for another guest. Bogdan Klich, who is their senator, a long-term fighter for democracy in Poland, and also the head of the Foreign Relations Commission of the Polish Senate. So whilst we're waiting for another speaker, I'd like to give the floor to Joerg, and I would like Joerg, over to you to discuss what has happened recently. And in Belarus, over the skies, as Michal said, your article on Political Monday was a very timely reaction with multiple recommendations how the EU should respond to that. Now, when we know that the EU already had a meeting and they already elaborated on a number of further measures and further steps, how feasible do you think it is, and how efficient? And in this regard, what do you think can other Western partners do, the UK and the US, whether there can be any also transatlantic cooperation in this regard? Over to you. And but sorry, just before you start, I would like to greet our another guest, Senator. Great, you're here. Can you hear us? Senator, can you hear us?
Yes, good afternoon.
Wonderful.
I see you and I hear you. I hope that I'm also visible here.
Yes, we're so happy you joined. We're so happy you've joined. I was just saying that Joerg will start our conversation, speaking about the EU perspective and any possibility on transatlantic cooperation in the regard of conflict.
I'm so sorry to be delayed, but we have a very tough day. You know, one day before voting on the recovery fund in the Senate, I'm responsible for the approach of our political group and. Both, I mean, ratification of the recovery fund and let's say the special resolution that we are trying to introduce. So I'm so sorry for being a little bit late.
Wonderful. And so to inform you, dear Senator, I would like you to speak after Joerg to give us the recent perspective on Poland, what Poland is doing, and then it will be Arnoldas speaking. And just for our audience, please feel free to use the Q&A button for your questions, and please make sure you also say about your affiliation. So without any further ado, dear Joerg, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Veronica, and many thanks to my colleagues in Warsaw for bringing this round together. I think it's very timely. because of the events that we've seen happening in Belarus a couple of days ago. I'm not going to recap these events. Instead, Veronica asked me to provide a bit of an EU angle. This is obviously not the EU perspective. It's rather my reading of the EU response as we have seen it so far. Many of you may have noticed the EU Council conclusions from Monday. In my opinion, this is a very swift, very clear, and potentially also very substantial response. So I do think that the EU deserves kudos for this. We have seen over the last year how difficult on occasion it was for the European Union to come to an agreement on policies vis-a-vis Belarus. But in this case, I think the EU was at its best. This happened very quickly. This is certainly also due to the early and strong impulses from a number of member countries, Lithuania, Poland. I'd also mention Greece here. This has certainly paved the way for a quick response. Now, if I say substantially or potentially substantial, then I'm saying this because we obviously have to see how these EU Council conclusions are being filled with life. At the moment, a lot of that is still on the level of declaration, and the measures that the Council asked for in these conclusions are now to be implemented. And there, I think. We have measures on a number of levels. There's obviously the demands for Raman Pratasevich and his fiancée to be freed. I think we have to be realistic that this is something that will be very hard to achieve. We see over 400 political prisoners in Belarus as of today. And there is, in fact, very little that the EU can do in order to free them really and quickly. That said, I think there is a lot we all can do in order to make the fate for those political prisoners somewhat more bearable, and that is to pay maximum attention to all of them, because I think international attention for victims of political repressions, especially for political prisoners in Belarus, are a key lifeline. So I think we have to make sure that maximum attention is on all these individual fates, that they also receive the assistance that we can muster, whether it's legal assistance or even material and family assistance. So I would say that we have to be realistic what we can do, but we also should roll out everything that is possible on our end. There obviously is then the big question of an investigation into this incident. I think this will be critical because many question marks are still open. Including the presence on the flight of a number of people who disembarked in Minsk, the role that they played. Everything that happened on that plane from start to finish does need to be properly investigated. And here again, this won't be easy. This is not something that the Lukashenko regime will particularly support. This is also something that may be politically bombarded from other sides, including Russia. So I think this is an effort that will take some time, but has to be done properly because too many questions are still open. For me personally, the biggest surprise in the Council conclusions was the mention explicitly of economic sanctions, because we have seen over the last year or so, and in effect for at least 20 years in EU policy vis-a-vis Belarus, how hard it is for the EU to come to any form of agreement in relation to economic sanctions. This is something that a number of member countries, including my own Germany, have categorically ruled out in the past, and even as late as this spring, when the discussions were on about the fourth sanctions package. Something seems to have shifted there, and we now need to obviously see how these economic sanctions will take shape. We can certainly have a separate discussion about this because this is a complex issue. But for me, that was the most surprising. And the last point that's in there is obviously the the extension of the list of individuals that will be listed for travel bans and asset freezes. For me, it remains to be seen whether this is simply a relabeling of the forced sanctions package that was being prepared for many months now, and that was to be agreed in June anyway, or whether there will be a substantial extension of that list to include many of those who are involved in this accident. So, to cut a long story short, this is something that I think we all need to watch closely, how the EU now translates its conclusions into action. We should not assume that this is now all automatic. A lot of that can still be shaped, it can be strengthened, it can be weakened, and deserves, I think, maximum attention for all of us who wish for strong European pressure on Belarus.
Thank you very much, Joerg, for this insightful reply. I would like now our senator to speak, Senator Bogdan Klich, to speak about Poland's perspective on that, and what do you think should be the further actions undertaken by Poland? You were one of the first signees of this letter with other senators to the International Aviation Organization, calling also NATO and the European Union to take certain steps and to investigate what has happened. So are you also personally satisfied with how the EU responded on that, or do you think there should be something else done here? And what do you think in terms of the transatlantic cooperation here between the EU and the US and Canada, our Western Hemisphere partners? What do you think can be done further on in this regard?
Thank you very much for this opportunity of sharing my views, not only my views, but views of my political circle concerning what should be done and what was done according to our obligations, because these are our obligations to react for the situation in the neighboring country first, and secondly, after or during such a huge wave of let me say that Stalinist repressions against a society. This is the first case during last years that so many people were tortured, that so many people were arrested, that so many people were detained, and so many people suffered in any of our neighboring countries. So this is our obligation. This is our obligation, and I'm very glad to say that although there are deep differences between the ruling coalition in Poland and the opposition, so in this case, in the case of Belarus and our reaction towards Belarusian crisis, let's say that the opposition and the ruling coalition, we speak with the same voice, and we have the same approach. Of course, it could be better and quicker reaction from Poland, but I am satisfied with the current, let's say, level of involvement of our government, and this is not the first time that I express this opinion publicly. Secondly, I wanted to say that I have the feeling that as Europe, as the European Union, we could go much further, that we could do much more. And as transatlantic community, the same. We could do much more for Belarusians. Against this background, the last decision of the European Council seems to be far-reaching, because there are 2 points that Joerg underlined. One of them, it is the presence of the economic sanctions towards the regime of Lukashenka regime, but I would like to underline also the other one. I mean, this declaration of extending sanctions. What does it mean, extending sanctions? I hope, and this is my wish as well as the wish of many freedom lovers in Poland, that not only those who take decisions, but also those who implement those terrible decisions during last months are included into this list of sanctions. So that the sanctions of the European Union cover also those servants of the regime that are responsible for detaining people, murdering people, torturing people, as well as others. So as far as I know from our Belarusian friends, they had the chance to identify hundreds of such people. So those hundreds of such people should be covered by the European sanctions to show to the Belarusian public opinion and to the world that the European Union is ready to react when there is an assault on personal lives, protecting victims and families. From that point of view, I hope, and I tried to express this this wish in Vilnius yesterday and 2 days ago with my colleagues from the Seimas, that we expect, as longest list of people sanctioned by the European Union with personal sanctions. So this is my second remark. The third one, it is that this is the first time during the last years, and we remember that very well, I hope, with Minister Pranckevičius, with whom together we had the chance to collaborate between 2004 and 2007 in the delegation of the European Parliament towards Belarus, that this is the first time that there is no hesitation between sticks and carrots. Between sticks and carrots, the situation of such a wave of brutal repressions in Belarus, it doesn't give us any hope that this regime will be ready to implement, let's say, the standards of international standards of human rights and civil liberties. I hope that this is the end of this temptation within the European Union. So now we should concentrate on sticks, only on sticks, although knowing very well that it may mean the annexation of Belarus by Russian Federation. Because it was the main reason of our hesitation during the last decades that we were simultaneously in favor of human rights in Belarus on one hand, and on the other hand, we are in favor of independence of Belarus. But Lukashenko, he crossed every red line. So in such a situation, we have to be on the side of those who are victims of this regime, and we should think about, we should try to help people in Belarus. How to do not only with sanctions. First of all, to support, the families and all the refugees, Belarusian refugees, in every member state of the European Union. In some cases, it means to protect them by our services. Secondly, it means helping Belarusian students to continue their education in our universities. That's absolutely necessary. And from that point of view, the program that was implemented by the current government in Poland, or the program that was extended by the current government in Poland, seems very interesting. As far as I know, you have also in Lithuania such a program. So all universities should be more open for Belarusian students wanting to continue their education. Third task, it is to continue to support financially Belarusian websites, let's say in general, independent media, among them those who play such an important role as Nexta channel. I mean, independent websites. This is the main channel of communication between independent citizens of Belarus, between free Belarusians. So from that point of view, it is also our obligation to continue that, even to reinforce that, to extend, you know, this program. And finally, we are waiting for the next summit of the alliance in June. NATO members will concentrate not only how to reinforce the transatlantic link, not only on the cooperation between NATO and the European Union, but there is a promise that they will concentrate also on the support for democratic values, for those values that were included into the Washington Treaty in 1949, the preamble of the Washington Treaty in 1949. It means that NATO should be also responsible, you know, for supporting free Belarusians in their attempt to reduce the tension, because such a regime, Lukashenka regime, can carry out unexpected moves, unexpected steps. So from that point of view, he is also a threat for our security, especially of the security of the eastern flank of the alliance. From that point of view, it is also one of the issues that should be included into the agenda of the next summit of the alliance. Thank you. Very briefly.
Thank you, Senator Arnoldas. Would you please pick up on this one? Or I would like you to speak about whether you think there are any possible further ties which should be established in the Central Eastern Europe between the partners, between Visegrad countries and the Baltic states. Whether you think there can be some joint initiatives on that, how to resolve this crisis in your neighbor country. And also, I would like you to say whether Lithuania is planning anything to ensure the security of political or exiles and refugees, or something raised quite fairly by Senator. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, and great pleasure to be at this wonderful event and a very important subject discussed at the GMF webinar. Indeed, I think, you know, this horrible incident, in fact, has shown how much we can do if we are acting together. And the level of cooperation has been really impressive from the outset, from Sunday afternoon, where here in Vilnius we felt incredible solidarity with all member states, and of course all countries which were heavily impacted by the incident, from Ireland to Greece to Poland, because the plane was also registered in Poland, have felt, you know, immediate reaction of all other European friends and allies across the Atlantic as well. So, you know, I don't know if Senator Klich will agree, but, you know, in my 15-year memory of EU institutions, I barely remember such a moment when the reaction would be so swift, so united, and so clear, only 24 hours after the event has happened. And therefore, I also completely agree with Joerg that, you know, we can definitely be satisfied by the conclusions of the European Council. You know, Lithuania worked very hard also with allies and also with the cabinet of President Michal to also transmit our ideas, which were Monday morning adopted by the government of Lithuania. And we ourselves were rather surprised that quite a few of those strong ideas in the end appeared on the paper, including on sectorial sanctions, not only the enlargement of the fourth package in terms of individual sanctions, in the asset freeze and visa ban, but for the first time, we will be moving in the case of Belarus to sectorial sanctions regime. Of course, the work which will require a lot of attention, a lot of detail, a lot of preparation. It will not be easy. It will not be done overnight. But again, it will require a very close coordination between member states with the leadership of the Commission and of the High Representative. But a lot of groundwork will have to be done by most of our capitals. So I see this as a very much mobilizing exercise in the weeks to come. And I completely also agree with Senator Klich that one of the areas where we have to focus and where we haven't yet exhausted our potential is the support for democratic opposition, civil society, which of course is a very difficult area to be effective, especially in Belarus, on the ground, as the country is further isolating itself and becoming very difficult to reach. And now with the ban of airspace travel and of course the overflight of carriers, this becomes even more difficult. Unfortunately, we're seeing Belarus moving into the space of countries like North Korea and increasingly and overwhelmingly dependent now on Russia and Russia's goodwill and the political support of President Putin. Nevertheless, this should not stop us from extending the hand as much as possible and in all ways we can to people who are suffering there and who are fighting for human rights every day. The amount of human rights repressions, arrests, detentions since August elections is unprecedented in Belarus. And indeed, it is unprecedented that so many have also fled and find themselves in exile, both in Warsaw and in Vilnius. And it is our responsibility as European governments to give full protection to those people who need it. So definitely, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who is Lithuania's guest since August last year, is benefiting from Lithuania's full protection. But we are definitely assessing the situation and seeing what we can do for quite a few other democracy fighters who find themselves in Vilnius, and knowing that the regime now has crossed the lines that before were unthinkable, we should be prepared for anything. And listening today to Alexander Lukashenko's speech to the parliament in Belarus, we can see the level of insanity and of desperation and the ability to create the most absurd stories in order to justify the unacceptable act of sending. So we should arm ourselves with patience. We should increase the pressure and go even further than the agreed conclusions in terms of individual sanctions and the targeted sanctions. I would say Lithuania has always also proposed as a measure in the future to consider freezing different EU financing programs and projects that directly benefit Belarus state authorities. And President von der Leyen on Monday made a statement in this regard, but the Commission still has to implement that decision practically. And secondly, we also proposed, that the access to international financial institutions should be limited as well as a possible sanction. So really maximizing the pressure on the regime, maximizing also the pressure on the release of Raman Pratasevich and Sofia Sapega and all other political prisoners, looking for humanitarian solutions for people who are there in prison and who unfortunately, some of them have already died. And at the same time, doubling our effort in terms of finding ways to support civil society, democratic opposition, and independent media.
Thank you very much, Arnoldas. Before I have another question to Joerg, I would like to ask our guests to make sure that they have the name and the affiliation, because I've just seen that there is a question from an anonymous attendee. So please make sure that you have your first, last name and the affiliation so that we can refer properly to your questions. Thanks for this. So Joerg, I think that and I'm very happy that Arnoldas has brought up the issue of Lukashenko's address today, where he spoke about the fact that basically Belarus is surrounded by enemies, and this is terrorism coming from kind of all these other states and countries. And from what we see, we can understand that there will be more activities coming from them in order to isolate Belarus in any possible way. But we also know that following their decision of the European Union, and also the recommendations, rather, that most of European airlines stopped flying from Belarus and stopped receiving flights of Belarusian airlines. And from what we see now on social media, there is a big debate among Belarusians whether this approach, the worse the better, will be beneficial, or whether they will feel more helpless now. So do you have any ideas as an expert in the region how to resolve this dilemma? I know it's a difficult question, but perhaps you have some ideas about this. Thanks.
Thanks, Veronica. This is a difficult question that has been with us for a very long time, because one of the arguments that has always been used also by some in the European Union was that we need to increase pressure on the Lukashenko regime, but we must not hurt the Belarusian population. And yes, this is a right sort of train of thought, in my opinion, but it's basically an undoable task. Because if you do indeed want to increase pressure on that regime in Minsk, there will always be a fallout for the population. If you introduce strong economic sanctions, there will obviously be people, employees of those companies involved that also pay a price for this. This is inevitable. And at the same time, I think we do need to consider these forms of pressure because we have seen them bear results in the case of Belarus. To take a very simple example, US sanctions against Vilnius, the state oil concern, led in 2008 to the freeing of political prisoners. So we have seen episodes in Belarus where this pressure helped. What I would say here to resolve at least somehow this conundrum is we should listen to the Belarusians. We do see in online surveys, certainly not representative, but we do see a lot of voices from Belarus who basically say we need stronger pressure, and be it at some cost to Belarusian society, because we want this nightmare to be over. We are ready also to sacrifice some of our well-being, which is already being threatened by the Lukashenko regime. So there is quite some support in the Belarusian public for sanctions against the Lukashenko regime. The one online survey that I recall is on the question of whether or not Belarus should be excluded from the SWIFT international payment system. And that online survey gave a 65% majority of the audience involved in favor of those sanctions. So I think we should try to put ourselves in the shoes of the Belarusians, listen to them, and take this out of the abstract, because this is a conundrum that cannot be resolved with economic sanctions. One thing I would add here, and this is a discussion that's been sort of very lively in many ways over the last couple of days, is the question, and I think one of the participants here also put this question in the chat, whether the national airline of Belarus, Belavia, should be banned from flying into EU airspace. And we have seen that it is being banned by individual countries. Flights have been cancelled, and so on. And the argument that comes from many of our partners in Belarus is, and this is also what the question relates to, this basically closes one of the few avenues that people who find themselves under pressure in Belarus have now to leave had to leave the country. So this is the one avenue that could be used relatively freely for people to escape the country. This is true. This is a downside of this decision, but in my opinion, it should still not mean that we reverse that decision. Because on the upside, this increases the pressure on Belarus broadly, whether it's on people in the apparatus, on diplomats, whether it's on business ties that Belarus entertains with foreigners. So this broadens the pressure on the regime. And it is, in my opinion, quite effective. Last point on this is, even though until now Belarus could fly and people could use that channel to leave the country, they had no guarantee that they could fly out of the country. They could still be hindered by the Belarusian authorities. So what I mean to illustrate with these examples a little bit is exactly the dilemma that you outlined. There is no easy question to that. But I do think that the readiness of Belarusians to bear some of the costs that economic sanctions inevitably bring with themselves has increased dramatically over the last year, because the situation has become so unbearable for many in Belarus.
Thank you very much, Joerg, for sharing your thoughts. I would like to pass the floor now to Senator Klich. Senator, so you've also mentioned, and there's also one of the questions, the issue of this possibility of further deep integration of, to put it in a euphemistic way, Belarus with Russia. So do you think also, how can we ensure this balance, that this is not happening? And also, I would like you to perhaps assess, because you're also a long-term expert on EU-NATO relations. So how do you think also our partners from the US and the UK can contribute into this joint reaction by the EU?
I don't have doubts, you know, that the new administration of President Joe Biden understands very well the situation in Eastern Europe. Without any doubts, personally, President Biden and personally Tony Blinken know what is the role of such countries as, on the one hand, Ukraine, on the other hand, Belarus, in stabilizing the situation in Central and Eastern Europe. That's why I am pretty sure that the new American administration will go together with us Europeans. That's first. Secondly, I also don't have any doubts, fortunately, that the UK will do the same. Let's take into consideration the first reaction of the Foreign Secretary of the UK on Monday. It was the same line of thinking about introducing a ban on flights and overflights, including the UK airlines. So we speak with the same voice, and I hope that I had the chance to discuss yesterday this issue with one of great ladies in the US Congress, and the understanding of this issue by several caucuses. I mean, also Baltic American caucus is absolutely clear. American congressmen and women, as well as senators, speak with the same voice. So I hope that there will be also as quick as possible reaction, and introducing new sanctions according to the executive order of President Joe Biden. This one of, as far as I remember, March this year. So these are good news. Bad news are connected with what you called next steps of integration between Russian Federation and Belarus. I would call it, and I called that process, the annexation of Belarus. Let me only recall that comparing with the situation even 10 years ago, a decade ago, that I remember when I was a minister of defense, when only some parts of Belarusian armed system of armed forces was integrated with the Russian one. Now we have the situation that almost all dimensions, all aspects of Belarusian armed forces are fully integrated with the Russian ones. It means that there is almost full integration between those two military systems. It means that those units, Belarusian units that are not included into this integrated system, these are units that are not necessary for Russian plans in the future. All those units and all those assets that are useful for Russian armed forces were integrated before. In other areas of civilian, in other civilian areas, this process is more or less advanced. So from that point of view, right now we have the situation that this process can be completed, and it gives me the window. It gives us the window of opportunity of including the issue of Belarus and into talks with Vladimir Putin during the next meeting, during the first meeting of President Joe Biden with Russian leader. I hope that this issue will be on the agenda, and the Russian Federation will be, also, let's say, involved in the process of releasing prisoners, political prisoners in Belarus, because once again, the fate of those hundreds of political prisoners in Belarus should be the issue that we should be concentrated on.
Thank you very much, Senator, for your extended answer. I would like now to start collecting some of the questions. Some of them have been covered already, but perhaps Arnoldas, as Lithuania has been at the forefront of talking to the EU about measures they can take, perhaps you can answer the questions on what, in your opinion, could be the economic sectors of Belarus, which should probably target it, if you agree that this approach should be taken towards the Belarusian government.
Oh, yes, Veronica. Well, I think it's very important to keep in mind a very important factor that those targeted sectorial measures should, as much as possible, hurt the regime and as little possible the society at large. Joerg is right; it's not easy to find this solution, but it is possible. We've seen that also in the case of Russia in 2014 July, when the third package of sanctions came into being after the shooting down of MH17 and the sectorial sanctions which hit the dual-use technologies, which hit the arms trade and embargo, which also hit the oil-related industries, as well as some financial institutions and their access to capital markets. The reason behind them was exactly to hurt the regime of President Putin, but not at large the people. So I would probably guess that the work, which is only now starting by the Commission, the European External Action Service, and the EU member states, will be directed in this way. We will first do a very in-depth analysis of different sectors which are the most connected to Lukashenko regime. We will see the impact that those sanctions can do. We will see also the impact that it can have on the European economy and on the trade and economy of specific member states. And I would think only then the decisions will be made. So, as I said before, this will require quite a bit of preparation. And therefore, it is very important first to move ahead with the fourth package, which is just anything but prepared, but it now has to be reinforced with adding people, individuals, and entities like Belarus, for instance, which were directly involved in this act, and then prepare the fifth package with different sectors that, as I mentioned, could be painful for the regime. I wouldn't like to speculate exactly the sectors. Probably this is not correct from my side, especially in a public discussion, but this will have to be done.
Thank you very much, Arnoldas. And how was met this information shared by Alexander Lukashenka earlier today that they were trying actually to protect their Ostrovets nuclear station, which is bordering Lithuania, and this is why their plane was diverted to Minsk. What was the direction of the Lithuanian society on that? And I know that it's a very important issue for Lithuania. How would you further deal with this, because it remains there?
Well, Lithuanian society, took this remark as a very cynical remark, given the fact that Ostrovets nuclear plant as such hasn't met the nuclear safety standards. Lukashenka and his government are endangering not only us as neighbors, but the Belarusian society as well. And the Prime Minister Shimonita, I think, put it very well. She said, whatever Lukashenka told today Belarusian parliament, he was not talking to us in the West. He was not talking to our citizens, governments, and media. He was talking to his own people in order, to convince him of the version of his story and to further his propaganda. So we were not the target of that communication, but it only shows the extent to which he can go in terms of lying and turning the story around, calling the reaction of the European Union, united and firm reaction, as a hybrid attack against Belarus, whilst in fact the contrary was the case. This special operation by Belarusian KGB was nothing else but a hybrid attack against the EU and the citizens of the EU who were taken hostage in Minsk airport. And finally, what I will say is that with this behavior that the regime showed on Sunday, we were only reconfirmed that, first of all, Mr. Lukashenka is becoming more and more unpredictable and more erratic, not only in his words, but also in actions. And secondly, and even more importantly, that he is able and willing to endanger or create danger not only for the European Union, but for his own citizens. The lives, the safety, the well-being of his own citizens is not something that he cares about. And that was quite clear how he dealt with Raman Pratasevich and how he has dealt with so many other political prisoners in Belarusian prisons. And therefore, he has become a danger to everyone for the reason of securing himself and making everything possible to stay in power.
Thank you very much, Arnoldas. Joerg, I'm sorry in advance, but I have another difficult question for you. Because one of the attendees is asking if the protests didn't lead to, Lukashenko didn't make him resign or flee the country. And also, as we know that the power structure is very much infiltrated by most probably Russian forces. What do you think would be the final solution, or I would say the last nail for Lukashenko to resign or flee the country or just leave his post? Do you think there are still any possibilities to do this? I know we're only speculating, but I think at this moment it's needed again to reflect on this a little bit.
Well, thanks. I think, first of all, we want to acknowledge that that everything that's happened in the last couple of days, also the communication by Alexander Lukashenko today, are an utter sign of weakness and nervousness. He may have managed to basically pacify very brutally the protests that we've seen evolving since last summer. He has intimidated an entire population not to take to the streets anymore. But he hasn't been able to remove the thought of injustice from people's minds. People are still, I think, convinced that they deserve better, that their country should be developed in a different direction, that they voted for somebody else, that they deserve a different leader and government. So this thought is there. And this sort of moving away of, I believe, a strong majority of society from this regime cannot be reversed. There's just no way for Alexander Lukashenko to regain some degree of legitimacy in this society. And I think he knows that. I think he knows perfectly well that the silence that he has created at the moment does not mean agreement by Belarusian society with him. And I think there is a lot of insecurity that comes out of that, and he's trying to sort of assert his rule. He's trying to also assert his standing within the apparatus. He's trying to keep degrees of cohesion of the apparatus. I think one of the interesting details of the action on Sunday was that it involved various parts of the security apparatus. I mean, there was the KGB, there was the Interior Ministry, there was the army involved. I think he also needs to constantly sort of keep cohesion in this apparatus, which consists of parts that are also working against each other. So I think we should not see strength in any of his actions, rather desperation, exactly as Arnoldas said. Now, what's to be sort of resolved here? It's a structural conflict between a society that has emancipated and an anachronistic political status quo. You can freeze that structural conflict, but you need to resolve it at some stage. And the only way of resolving that is by way of some form of political transition away from the status quo. Now, the freeze can last for a very long time. And our colleagues from Poland know this, because the situation in Poland after martial law was very akin to the situation in Belarus today. This is a de facto state of martial law that you have there, in a situation where there is an external sponsor with Russia that basically keeps an unwanted regime in place. It's as simple as that. Now, what are the options of resolving that? Basically, the only one that I personally see is if Alexander Lukashenko becomes untenable to the Kremlin. If the cost of his maintenance becomes so high, not only financial costs, the costs of his maintenance and support by the Kremlin becomes so high that they have to look for alternatives. One aspect of this is obviously financial. In this situation that Belarus is in now, as Poland knows from its own experience, the country will impoverish. There's no other way, because resources will be drawn away to keep up the repressive apparatus. No investment comes in and so on. Development is over, basically, for the country. That means Russia will have to chip in order to keep the system, this regime, afloat financially. The second is the political cost for the Kremlin is going up. I don't think that the Kremlin is all that excited about what happened on Sunday, because they are associated with this. People, including in Belarus, basically say this is only possible because the Lukashenko regime has been kept in power by external support from the Kremlin. So I think the political cost is going up for the Kremlin. Now the question is how far the Kremlin is ready to go to put up with this liability, which Lukashenko is for Putin and his regime in Russia. Perhaps very far, but we don't know. But I personally think that what we can do from the outside, including with sanctions, is to drive up the costs, including especially for Russia, of this regime staying in power. And at the same time, we can continue to consolidate the societal wish and desire for self-determination in free elections. This is where all the support belongs into society, into victims of political repressions, independent media, civil society, all the things that Bogdan especially has mentioned. but there is no direct way for us to effect any form of regime change in the country.
Thank you very much, Joerg. It's very useful. I have a question of the audience. So if you are okay with that, we will stay for the guests, of course, for 7 more minutes. And I will just quickly have 2 questions to both Senator and Arnoldas. Senator, my question would be also coming from one of their attendees, and also reflecting on what Joerg has just said. So how do you maintain this balance of not pushing Belarus too much to Russia, or do you have the feeling that this is coming to an end at some point, and that Russian leadership is about also to find a different kind of solution to this long-term crisis, not just keeping authoritarian rule the way it is in Belarus? And my question to Arnoldas would be, as Lithuania has already been a part very actively of international jurisdiction, would it be possible somehow to extend this criminal liability to Lukashenko and like his closest surrounding himself, you think? Or because just our audience is asking whether this is possible legally. I personally don't think it is, but perhaps you have some other insights because of the Lithuanian experience. Thank you.
I have the feeling, I suppose that I have answered this question before, maybe without the conclusion, maybe without the clear conclusion. So now only the conclusion. Alexander Lukashenko doesn't guarantee the independence of Belarus anymore. It was our dream. It was our, for years, our dream that it is possible to convince him with so-called carrots. And we believe that it would be possible to maintain independence of Belarus, giving those carrots to this so-called leader. But now, after such a level of integration between Belarus, between various sectors of Belarusian public life and economy, together with the state of Belarus and Russian Federation, Alexander Lukashenko doesn't guarantee independence of Belarus anymore. That's why, and only that's why, I mentioned this idea that was presented by Belarusian opposition in exile to introduce into the agenda of bilateral talks between President Biden and Mr. Putin, Belarusian issue. In what way? In the way of maintaining independence of Belarus, because those costs that Joerg Forbrig described a while ago are very high for Vladimir Putin to, if he decides to support Alexander Lukashenko again in future. That's why, frankly speaking, I am against speaking about any nation over the heads of such a nation. And I protested very strongly if from various circles in 2014 and later in 2015, there were proposals to speak about resolving the conflict in Donbass in Ukraine by 2 leaders, American and Russian leader. So I was strongly against that. But in such a case that we see right now in Belarus, that the society doesn't have any involvement, any influence on the future of its state, because it is in the hands of this brutal regime, I would allow, the solution of strategic discussion between American and Russian leaders, because Belarusian state and big part of economy is so deeply integrated with the Russian one.
Thank you so much, Arnoldas. Do you agree? And over to you on the last question for today.
Thank you very much. Indeed, somehow we have to keep on separating Lukashenko from Belarus, and I think that's a very important thing, for Belarusian people who are fighting for independence and freedom, and for the rerun of presidential elections, which were rigged. To keep in mind that, of course, by putting pressure on him, there is no intention of anyone in Europe or America to push Belarus further to Russia. The contrary is the case, is to show that this man, as Joerg has said, has lost all legitimacy, and that indeed he has just become a puppet of President Putin, as Mr. Klich has just said. But it's for Belarusian people to define the future and the fate of their country, and not for President Putin, and definitely not for the leader who has lost legitimacy and who has turned against his own nation with his acts. Now, on your questions on judicial, how to say, persecution and whatnot, we have one court case going on in Vilnius, which probably could set a precedent of one Belarusian activist who has brought charges against the regime for his beating and detention. We will see how this case will proceed. But I think what is even more important is the now numerous initiatives, both in Belarus and in member states, by Belarusians themselves and human rights organizations to gather evidence, to gather information, to really create, justice hubs as help, legal and expertise help for those who are repressed, and to prepare a case for the future. The crimes like that, which are committed in Belarus, they don't disappear. They are there, and one has to keep those evidence flowing in order to make sure that the people who are responsible for those crimes sooner or later face international justice.
Thank you very much. I really like that the last word said in our discussion is justice, and I do hope it will win. In Belarus, I would like to thank all attendees for being so active, and I would like especially thank to our wonderful panelists, Joerg, Senator, and Arnoldas, for finding time in your extremely busy schedule, especially these days, and agreeing to speak for us to such a broad audience. And I do hope that this event will give some especially extremely good food for thought for everybody who's involved in this situation inside Belarus and outside. Thank you so much, and
thank you.
Good luck, everyone. Живи Belarus, and let's be in touch, and let's keep our efforts joined as they are.
Живи Belarus.
Thank you very much. Живи Belarus.
Thank you. Живи Belarus.
Thank you so much.